We are live finally. I am Dan Kingerski on the Pittsburgh Hockey Now platforms. There I am using the backup laptop. I'm curious how the camera is. I'm kind of looking at it. I my life is usually a walking disaster. I don't know if you read the Dan's Daily from the craziness on Wednesday. Motorcycle ride, breaking news, hitting a deer, losing my brakes, getting everywhere I wanted to because everything just seemed to work out. To then the newer MacBook that's not even 6 months old, taking a dirt nap on me. So we have to go get that fixed and blah, blah, blah. We're going to talk some hockey today. We're going to talk about the fallout from the Penguins naming new coach Dan Muse. And I'm going to be a bit blunt about, I think, the media coverage leading up to it. Put a pin in that. We're going to talk about how the new coach might affect the roster, but also about the trade costs around the league. So listen, every live chat we do, every Q&A I do, there is the undoubted, hey, what about this player? Can we trade this player for that player? So we're going to get into the actual costs of, let's say, JJ Peterka, Marco Rossi, and anybody else you want to throw on the wall. Plus, of course, all of your questions. I'm seeing just your notes here that David Quinn followed Sullivan to New York. And I'm doing this. I need to write that story, but I suppose that story will have to wait while my other reporters. So we're going to get into the questions here in a few moments. Let me tell you a bit about everything I was told yesterday about Dan Muse, because it does drive me nuts a little bit that people who have no idea start tossing in grenades, right? Oh, Dan Muse is a defensive coach. I heard this. I heard he's big into analytics. I have no idea where some of this stuff came from because it was not told to us by the people who know him. So, let's get into Dan Muse's progression. I mean, he really was kind of in that Boston prep school world, and he probably deserved to be there. I'm going to tell you about his progression, because here is kind of a guy who's small in stature, does not have a big commanding presence. For all of his faults, Mike Sullivan does in fact believe that as he walks and as he speaks, that is the law. Dan Muse certainly, doesn't carry himself with that same necessarily, we'll call it a self-assuredness. We'll be polite, right? He used to kind of speak quickly with a very thick sort of Massachusetts, New Hampshire accent. It kind of all blends, that deep, but also very soft-spoken. And he had to kind of keep learning and growing how to present himself to be an effective coach. He had to keep learning and growing. And that was a constant theme that we were told, that he just kept acquiring the skills for the next level. So we're going to jump ahead. I mean, he wins the championship with the Chicago Steel in the USHL 2018 and moves to the U.S. National Development Team, the USNDTP, where he's coaching the U18s, the 17s, the World Championships, the World Juniors, and so forth. USA Hockey is a progressive thinking organization as in terms of hockey. They're the drills, the game, and how they think the game, where the game is evolving, where it's going. So I suppose it's kind of funny that as Sullivan goes to New York, Muse, who crossed paths with Sullivan quite a bit with USA Hockey, as Muse is holding the juniors, and Sullivan has been taking most of the national teams now for the last 4 years, goes to New York. Let me see if Dave or Shelley can write that David Quinn story. Give me one moment here, because it's going to drive me nuts as I'm sitting here talking on the live chat. Okay. Where he is headed, where Quinn is headed, is always kind of on the upward. How he got into the NHL, and I alluded to this in the story. Maybe a voice inflection tells you just how impressive it was. He wasn't on anybody's radar for an NHL job when he got the gig with Nashville. Was it 20 or 21? I think it was 2020. A few friends of Peter Laviolette, who obviously also was associated with USA Hockey back at that point, just kept encouraging him to talk to Dan Muse. Like, you got to do it. You have to talk to Dan. Talk to Dan. And he eventually does. And Muse gives him such a presentation, it blows Laviolette away. It essentially gets him the job on the spot, because Laviolette is just so impressed. Like, wow, where did this guy come from? Gets the job in Nashville. He's there the 3 years with Laviolette. Goes back to USA Hockey, does some other stuff, and then goes with Laviolette to New York. Wait, are you all just pulling my leg about Quinn going to New York? Anyway. So if that didn't happen, I'm just reading your comments here. Is that not news? Are you all just opining that he's going there? You're killing me. So anyway, Laviolette was a big fan of Dan Muse. And what Muse is kind of like some of the best parts of Mike Sullivan, wherein he is ruthlessly prepared, endlessly into the game, breaking it down, looking ahead. What can we do? How can we fix? How can we change? How can we improve? And presenting that information. That was probably Mike Sullivan's best quality, certainly over the last several years. That's what the players really appreciated about him, was that he was always prepared and able to prepare them. That's going to win over the veterans. He's also far more collaborative. He's not coming in with a bedrock system that you guys are going to play my system. That's not happening here. He's coming in with some principles, with some ideas, and when Dubas is done building out a roster, he's going to take a look at that and fit that roster to a system, or fit a system to that roster, however you'd like to phrase it. That's certainly, I think, a little bit different than how the Penguins have been run for the last 5 years. Obviously, going back with the last two GMs in Pittsburgh, they brought some players who weren't Sullivan players. Good players nonetheless. Mikael Granlund is probably, maybe the prime example, even though Granlund was dealing with some, really unfortunate personal problems when he came to Pittsburgh. I've written about that. It became public in Sweden, so I don't mind mentioning. He was going through a divorce, and just the way his wife presented it in like the Swedish People magazine, you can see where a husband would take it sort of hard. I don't know that he did. We never knew about it until well after the fact, but. So, Mikael Granlund moves on. But obviously, Granlund was not a Sullivan-type player. The GM went out and got a player he thought was good and handed him to Sullivan. Well, I mean, you don't hand a claw hammer to a plumber. I don't know. Maybe you do. Maybe it's a bad example. You don't hand, a faucet to a carpenter. Whatever analogy you want to get into. That's what the last couple of GMs, I think, did a little bit too much of. Cody Glass and Philip Tomasino certainly really weren't Mike Sullivan-esque players. Glass made it work because he was so good defensively. Tomasino, poor Tomasino, was just fighting uphill all day long. Ryan Graves and so on and so forth. You get the idea. So Muse, as we talk about Erik Karlsson and such, fitting Erik Karlsson or Ryan Graves. Some of these players are going to get a new lease on life with Muse because I suspect, just because of the influx of young players coming, because of the number of players who struggled over the last couple of years with what the Penguins were trying to be, that they're going to get a new lease on life. Maybe Karlsson gets to really tap into the game he wants to play. Maybe the game isn't so difficult for Ryan Graves. Maybe Tomasino finds a little bit new life. Maybe P.O. Joseph finds a coach who isn't so willing to shove him to the press box and lets him build some confidence without looking over his shoulder every 10 seconds. You all had it backwards. You were jumping up and down, jumping ugly about, Jesse Puljujärvi and other guys who weren't any good. You missed the one player who actually was. But I digress. That's just, those are all examples that, things that might change. Also, just the style of how the Penguins are going to be coached is going to change because Muse is a more open, collaborative guy. Sort of, some of the things I liked about DJ Smith's candidacy, and I wish I had pictures for all this. I literally got home at 12:45. I got back from, West Virginia, Ohio this morning, and, I was racing back anyway. That's what I get for taking a day off. All hell breaks loose. I don't get down and back like I planned in any way. That's what I liked about DJ Smith's candidacy is that Smith was open-minded and collaborative with veterans while he brought along the young players. And so that's what Muse, it's what we expect of Muse. Hey, Sid, hey, Tanger, hey, Carl, hey, Rusty, hey, Gino, I'm thinking this. And having that conversation, probably a bit more of a two-way street than it has been while he brings those young players along. So that's, I don't know if it's a good choice or a bad choice. Unfortunately, Dan Muse's resume does resemble that of Mike Johnston. NHL assistant coach, great hockey mind, not necessarily the big commanding presence and not necessarily the leader that has served the Penguins well. Of course, neither you nor I, know what the Penguins roster will look like in October. Dubas might get snookered and only make a couple of small changes. Add, nickel and dime free agent here or there. Or somebody might put the ball on the tee and he takes a big swing. I think he'd like to take a few big swings. I think he'd like to jettison Erik Karlsson. I think he'd love to be able to have his goaltending situation set for the long term rather than punting that for another year. But he probably gets snookered on the goaltending situation. That's probably going to ride itself out for one more year before he has to make some final, absolute decisions. Again, and Muse is going to play a role in that because if Muse can get more defensive buy-in, if he can get buy-in from the veterans and get more buy-in from the team on anything resembling a defensive concept and conscience. I'll use Sullivan's word there, the defensive conscience. The Penguins didn't have one. The Penguins were sociopathic when it came to defense, especially this season. It's still this season till the Stanley Cup was awarded. Somewhere between the Cup and the draft, we have to flip the page to next season, or rather last season. So that's Dan Muse to me. A bit of an enigma, despite talking to some people who were really high on him and gave me the full, complete breakdown. He's going to even instruct the team in a different way. We're talking 21st century instruction here. I know it's 2025. We're a quarter of a way into the century, but the Penguins veterans, they like their whiteboards. They like even printouts. The Penguins veterans are those old people at the airport who still print their ticket on a full sheet of paper and hand it to the gate agent as gate agent's trying to, scan it because the printer didn't really print it all and they're complaining about the ink. And anyway, that's the Penguins veterans. Grandma and grandpa rolling up to the gate with a printout. My father printing out directions for the longest time. It's like, good Lord. Muse is going to go to the iPad instruction. It's going to go to the digital communication. Analog to digital, baby. Maybe that's one of the big headlines of this whole thing as well. So roll in the comments, because we can talk trade throughout the rest of this here little live chat. I appreciate all the people. Man, look at that. Pretty good numbers. I stopped putting this on Facebook because, quite frankly, the numbers were terrible on Facebook. Hundreds of people would check in for 3 seconds. It's like, what did you think this was? This is the live chat every week, and 3 seconds and out, so Facebook wouldn't promote it and blah, blah, blah. It's like, the hell with Facebook. Facebook is dead anyway. Dead. Okay, Brandon starts us off like he does every week. I just have to hear what you think of Quinn following Sullivan to New York after Muse left for Pittsburgh. Shelly, I just texted Shelly as I'm monologuing here, and she said she doesn't see any credible reports that Quinn is going to the Rangers. If, in fact, you have one, do me a favor, Brandon, and post it. Let's just tug on the thread, though. There are plenty of rumors out there that Quinn would, and my buddy Jim Cerny, who was the Islanders play-by-play guy before going over to be like the Rangers team reporter for a decade, and then to NHL.com as a senior editor before he's coming back into this side of the world, was, he updated me on that possibility a couple of days ago. When Chris Drury fired David Quinn a few years ago, it wasn't the most amicable parting. Quinn, he was a little hurt by it all. He was chafed by Drury firing him. They didn't leave on the best terms. So for Quinn to come back to New York would be two guys swallowing a whole lot of pride. I don't think, unless you have, unless there's a news report on it, I don't actually think it's going to happen. Tom Gilroy, will Crosby still want to finish his career here or ask to be traded to a contender? I guess I can appreciate the question, Tom, because things have changed. Having said that, until Sidney Crosby opens the door in the slightest, until he wiggles even just a hair, this is a closed matter. Let's go to Joof 10. Any news on the Rangers pick? Okay, New rule on live chats and Pittsburgh Hockey Now. You are not allowed to ask me if there's news on anything. Here's why. If I had news, I'd report it. This is one of those honey mustard questions. We have ranch, Thousand Island, Italian, creamy ranch, and balsamic vinaigrette. Which one do you want? Do you have honey mustard? No. Did I say honey mustard? It's one of those honey mustard questions. No more honey mustard questions. I promise you. If I have stuff I can tell you, I will tell you. Okay. Let's go to Geert Hermans or Gert Hermans. Dubas saw signals during the season that it might be time for Sully to go. I know, which makes his vociferous defenses in January and February, when really the drumbeat was there, kind of, Dubas to that point really hadn't ever misled. That was a mislead based on his own words. He said one thing, and then later he said he was thinking another thing. Anyway, do I think that it's time? Do I think that's the time when his search process really started? Oh, I don't know. I think this coaching search took quite a while. If his search had started, let's say February or March, you would think it would have gone much quicker. You'd think if he began his search a couple months ago, even just mentally, internally, keeping, narrowing things down to a short list, you have that much time. Right? Jordan Bokar, overall thoughts. I assume you mean on Dan Muse? It is an okay hire. It could turn out to be very good. It could not work, and this could be a 2-year sort of situation. Both are equally possible at this point. And because there isn't a track record, for that reason, I'm ambivalent on it. I would have gone a different way. Of course, I wasn't in the interview process either, right? I don't know how many of you have ever done any hiring or firing. Surprises happen where you have, I can't tell you how many writers I have circled, like, oh, we're going to hire this guy. We've got an interview with him Thursday. And then in the process of the conversation, you're like, hell no. Good Lord, no. And sometimes people come out of nowhere and shock you. I've got a couple of those writers on staff right now. Will James in Philadelphia. Never saw him coming, didn't know who he was. Graduating from Penn State, just sends over some writing samples. And I was going I actually had hired a big name for Philadelphia. And when Will showed up, I was like, oh, Will, you're hired. Done deal. Take it and run with it, kid. Stay in touch with me every few days, every couple of days. I'll walk you through these processes. We'll get you there. And he's done a remarkable job. You just never know. Go to Michael Thompson. When will we know what the Penguins owe the Blues for POJ? Since we got him for future considerations, is there a time limit where the team has to receive something? Most of the time for a player on a minimum salary, the future consideration is nothing. Most teams will let that expire. They will send $1. I've actually seen that happen where a team paper clipped $1 to the trade agreement and sent it. That was the future consideration. Maybe St. Louis calls and says, hey, instead of the dollar, can you send us that 7th round pick? We need him for our ECHL team. And Dubas is like, yeah, we're over full and wheeling in that position. Here you go. Future considerations is nothing to worry about. It's been a long time since I've recalled a player to be named later being a significant asset. Flux CC, who's done some more videos that I have to, now that I'm home, dig into the server and distribute for the Hockey Now network. Matt says, does it behoove Dubas to get a former head coach as an assistant to help guide or mentor Muse as he adapts to his new role with the Penguins? Yes, but you have to be careful. I have seen situations in the past in which an assistant coach who had experience, more experience than the head coach, at least, in the NHL sphere, became the assistant and ended up kind of working against his boss. I've seen it. So you have to be careful on the who's and the what's-its and the how's-its and all of that. If I told you who, I think you'd be like, oh, yeah, I could see that. But I'm not. Let's go to Brandon again here. Friedman broke Quinn and Ty Hennis going to New York at 9 a.m. today. All right, I appreciate you. Let me yell at Shelley. This is why I don't take days off. Okay, I appreciate y'all. Let me know it came from Elliot. Brian P., when you and Anselm went over dark horse candidates, didn't either of you mention Dan Hughes? No, we didn't. We absolutely did not. I will also tell you, I've been able to obtain some sources around the Penguins' offices. It's kind of a futile endeavor for this reason. And buckle up, because I'm going to walk a tightrope here in criticizing a lot of secondary media. There are 3 people making decisions or, bouncing these decisions, discussing these ideas and decisions in the Penguins' offices in Cranberry. 3. And they're not talking to media. In fact, most of the time, they're not talking to other people around the office. They're not expanding the circle to get 3rd and 4th opinions. They're talking about it, and that's it. It's very much the same setup as Ron Hextall had. A tight-knit, closed, small circle, and that's the decision-making process. So when these guys, like the one guy, I think lives in Texas or Arizona, doesn't cover hockey games, so he's not at arenas. He's not involved in the day-to-day coverage of the Penguins where he'd have any Penguin sources. Starts spouting off about my team sources say it's Mitch Love, it's Mitch Love. I had to roll my eyes because all of you just bit on it. And unfortunately, now that it's over, and it obviously wasn't Mitch Love, and I kind of kept sounding that alarm, by the way, if you didn't catch me doing that numerous times. For some reason, the hockey audience, fans, readers, in large, don't hold those people accountable. There were 2 reporters who kind of stuck their finger in the air, not local. These aren't, these aren't my colleagues, and these aren't the national guys, Elliot and Darren and Pierre. I'm not speaking of any of them. But when there was sort of a drumbeat for Mitch Love, suddenly they had sources saying Mitch Love had the job. Well, obviously that wasn't true. And then weeks ago, they reported Marco Sturm had the Boston job. That obviously wasn't true. It came to fruition, but it wasn't true. And they don't get, for whatever reason, they don't get the same scrutiny or accountability that would apply to me. I'm not jealous. I'm saying to you, if you want to stop seeing crap reports, guys who are using you to boost their Twitter accounts, boost their profile, by all means, keep throwing that stuff at me. Oh, hey, this guy says this. Well, I'm a lot closer than that guy. And I know that guy doesn't have sources. There was one story, and I'm not going to, I don't want to toss people under the bus by name because then you get a public war. But I will tell you there was a big story in that February through March timeframe. I'm going to be a little bit vague about it, in which I know a reporter created a viral story about trade, trade or trades coming, by using a source that didn't work for the team. Not only didn't work for the team he was reporting it about, had left that organization. And even if he were with that organization, was in a completely different role. If the reporter had brought that source to me, I would have said, absolutely not. You can't use the janitor as a source. You can, start there and dig around if you'd like, but you can't run with a national story based on somebody who would have no way of knowing it. But they did, and they got lots of press, and I see that so often, especially the last few weeks, people sticking their finger in the air and claiming to have sources when I know that there's 3 people who knew what was going on, and they didn't tell anybody. Remember that for the future. Those 3 people keep it really close to the vest on the biggest decisions. And, I analyzed, I opined, I told you what things could mean. And I'm pretty happy with staying right there because I don't think we're going to get a whole lot of news out of Dubas. In fact, one agent, I reached out to an agent about negotiations with the Penguins in the last week. And the agent has in the past helped me out, provided some context, information on background, even some inside info like, hey, this is going to be happening, watch for it, and, I don't know when or how or this, whatever. And the email I got back was, I can't discuss anything with Pittsburgh anymore. So those 3 are clamping down as well. Just know that. Big Joe, I know it's Dubas's show, but do you think he did a temp check with Sid just to avoid the Mike Johnston road again? I also think EK65 will be the hardest to work with. I hope he gets dealt. I don't think Dubas would have checked with Sid before the final decision, but I would expect Dubas to have discussed it with Sid after he made the decision. How's that? That's what and maybe if Sid was like, absolutely not, if you do this, I'm out, then maybe Dubas has to, but we both know Sid would not do that. Mitch says Crosby isn't going anywhere. If he does, it will be because he is pushed out, which I doubt will happen. Exactly. Let's go to Brian, 2015. How soon before the fan base hates Muse? Yeah. Between us, right? There are probably 2 or 3 people, or 3 or 4 people, who sort of lead that charge on social media. Fans are always going to have emotions, but it seems like the Penguins fan base has a few people who can galvanize the people's sentiment and direct it in one way or another. I wish I had that power. I feel like I'm the person who is often denting the galvanized opinion. And I don't think, actually, I know that a lot of our readership and subscribers have come from people realizing, wait a second, they were wrong and Dan was right. Now, no one, you're not going to see a big Twitter banner saying that. Maybe we should. Maybe I should get a big Twitter banner for all the times I've been like, stop, this is the reality. You're going the wrong way. But I digress. We'll see. We'll see how much of a grace period Muse gets. I don't think Muse is going to get a long grace period. I just don't. He's going to have a humdinger of an opening press conference. And I just don't think that the Penguins are going to try that. I don't think they understand that. I don't think sports teams in general understand the fan base as fickle or as unique as the Penguins fan base can be. The Penguins have a very unique fan base, very active, very opinionated, Pittsburgh has taken a page from Toronto. Toronto fans kind of expect their opinion to be heeded by management, ownership. Pittsburgh has kind of adopted that too, if I'm being honest. I don't know how all that works. Kate S. Fan base needs to acknowledge that this isn't 2009. The vitriol about someone that people don't know a lot about is too much. He has a good resume. It's reported that he is great with the kids. Well, reported by, I'm one of those reports, by the way, Kate. Hi, how you doing? Nice to see you. Yeah, you don't win a championship in the USHL by having a veteran-laden team, right? You coach up the kids as best you can. You send them out there, and away you go. What veterans will be traded, Michael Parker asks. Well, glad you asked. Actually, here, I'm going to put Brian 2015 back up here. Muse hates old players. All right, I love that. That'll be the new mantra. Michael asked which veterans will be traded. The definitive answer to that cannot be given at this time. We all know the guys on the trade block. We all know the potentials. It will come down to what the market wants. You can take 10 pigs to the market, but the customers decide which of those pigs you sell. I should have said cows instead of pigs. You get the idea. 10 chickens to market, whatever. Dubas would, I'm sure, love to trade a few of his signings and acquisitions that haven't worked out. He'd love to get a first-round pick for them all. That's not going to happen. So you begin that whole process, right? If, then, else. If I trade Rickard Rakell, what do I get? If I get X, then I can do Y. Now I can move another player. Or if I don't get that price, can I get that price by trading somebody else? Or what if how does the lineup look if I do this or that? And what you don't want to do is get kind of to the point. I think Mike Greer in San Jose 2 years ago got caught in the rebuild process where the perfection board popped before he was ready. And the team wasn't quite finished from his offseason wheeling and dealing, and it was kind of a mess. It was much better this year in San Jose. But a couple of years ago, it wasn't. And I kind of felt like he expected to be able to do more things than he was able to do. So that's the long story short of me saying, I don't know if Rust and Rakell and Erik Karlsson and maybe even Chris Letang all get traded, or if one of those guys gets traded. You just, I can't definitively say that Karlsson will be traded because Dubas might pick up the phone 31 times about Karlsson. And let's just say the Arizona Coyotes, since they don't exist anymore, The fictional Arizona Coyotes say, yeah, we'd love Erik Karlsson. And Dubas says, great, I'll take a second-round pick. And they say, no, we'll take a first-round pick. And Dubas is like, wait, what you mean? And they're like, yeah, we'll take Erik Karlsson, but you're going to pay us a first-round pick. And Dubas says, no, I'm keeping the first-rounder. And they say, okay, well, you can give us Ville Koivunen then. And Dubas is like, well, hell no. And they say, okay, then call somebody else. That's just it's going to be a process, and I would think by this point Dubas sort of knows where he's going, but until things really begin to unfold a little bit closer to the draft, I have no idea. It really, I can only tell you the people who could be traded. I can't tell you who will be traded. Let's see here. Michael, will Dubas be fired if he screws up the coaching job? No. This is the start of the rebuild. You can almost give him a pass on the first 2 years. They almost don't count. For real. In terms of thinking about his job security, the first year is a wash. He was saddled with Hextall's mistakes, and he took a big swing to try to fix it all, and this big swing didn't work. All right. Second year, he begins to nibble at the rebuilding. Now it's his organization. He's going to get a solid 4 years from this point. Unless things go south. I don't mean sideways. I don't mean struggles. I mean crap hits the fan. Within 3 years. Dubas has almost a 3-year guarantee at this point. Sorry if that's not the answer you wanted. Let's see here. Thank you all for letting me know that Friedman did that. That'll teach me to get on my motorcycle and travel. Yellow Snow. Do we have the personnel to run Muse's power play? Or his Muse's power kill? McGroarty and Koivunen flying around might make it interesting. Yeah, I saw Jesse was going to do some things. Jesse Marshall was going to do some things on Muse's PK. We'll see. I would say yes. I would say if you turn Blake Lizotte and Noel Acciari and Rutger McGroarty to a lesser extent, Brian Rust maybe, you turn those guys loose on the penalty kill. Yeah, look, the Penguins had some pretty good stretches on the penalty kill over the last few years under Mike Vellucci. They really did. Yeah, I see no reason why they can't. Let's see here. Are there any assistant coaches left on Pittsburgh? No, actually. Ty Hennis and Dan Quinn went to New York. Vellucci and Andy Chiodo were also relieved. I haven't seen Chiodo land on his feet yet, but Vellucci is in Chicago. So no, the Penguins do not have any assistant coaches. Does the Combine usually happen while the Cup finals are going on? I am seeing no Combine coverage at all, which makes me sad. Kate, let me tell you why you haven't seen any Combine coverage. Yes, they go on during the Cup final, but no, there is no media availability or public access or media access until tomorrow. I will be there. You will see Combine coverage on Pittsburgh Hockey Now on Friday. Okay? We cool? That's just why. Because the NHL has some availability Friday afternoon and some of the workout tests 7:30 in the morning Saturday in Buffalo. So guess where I'm going to be. Let's go to B. Snyder. I guess maybe B. Snyder is related to D. Snyder. Ba-dum-bum. How do you know if Muse doesn't carry himself with self-assuredness? Did you listen to... y'all ask me questions sometimes when I gave you the answer as part of the answer. Every leader in a high-profile position has self-assuredness. That's an obtuse statement. All right, B, go away. I explained people were... Anyway. If you listened, I gave you that answer. When you said Muse isn't a loud voice, do you think Sid is going to have to play a coach role now and play a coach role now and player more than he... No, I'm not saying... Listen, do you think Pete DeBoer has that big commanding presence in the locker room? You know, do you think Jay Woodcroft or even Chris Knobloch have that domineering presence about them? No, they don't. You don't need to be, you don't need swagger to be a head coach. In certain situations, it helps. That's, let's go to Joof. Is Ponomarev officially going to the KHL? Joof, man, you just came to the chat. You haven't read anything, have you? You're killing me today. No. That was an erroneous report from Russia. Always take Russian reports with a grain of salt. Sometimes they're true. Sometimes they're not. It's just Russian reporting coming to North American reporters has been hit and miss, flip a coin, reliable for 25 years. It's just the nature of the beast for whatever reason. But Russian reports generally aren't reliable. What happened? One KHL team traded Ponomarev's rights to another KHL team. Now, can Ponomarev go to KHL? Sure, they might offer him a nice package. He might be frustrated with the Penguins organization. Kyle Dubas might have sat him down and said, listen, we're not real thrilled with your development. Certainly, Ponomarev didn't play very well in the NHL this year. What did he have? 9 games? Total white wallpaper games, which was in stark contrast to the player I saw in Wilkes-Barre, who was a Tasmanian devil. I mean, he was an animal in Wilkes-Barre. When he came to the NHL, he looked timid and kind of just background filler. So he could go to the KHL. He's certainly contractually able to, but we don't know yet. Let's go to Brendan. Do I think it's possible that Mitch Love may have struggled in the interview process with not only the Penguins, but other clubs, as he seemed to be a hot commodity and is left without a head coaching job? Very possible. I haven't seen any reports to that effect. I would think that's not the case. I mean, he's been hired as a head coach other places, right? And he got hired as an assistant in Washington, not just because he won. They didn't just come up off the street and say, hey, you won, coach of the year twice. Come on over. They would have interviewed him and put him through his paces to get a job in the NHL. So I would assume his interview skills are just fine. I'm a little surprised that he didn't get one of the jobs, but Chicago wasn't right for him. I don't think the Penguins were right for him. I thought Seattle and Boston were probably pretty good fits. I think Seattle made a huge mistake. Who did Seattle hire? They hired a coach who has not had success anywhere. Oh, it's gonna pop into my head here in a minute. Hackstall, Bilesma, and darn it. Anywho, with the decentralized draft and the combine being the last time Dubas will be face-to-face with other GMs, Do we see an off-season action start earlier this year than we normally would? Actually, I think the lack of a draft, I think the decentralized draft will actually, slow things down because you're not there to press the flesh and you can't go have a drink and really hammer this out. Jim Rutherford used to go behind the curtain with a GM and he'd disappear for half an hour. They would hammer it out and phone calls would start and the process, each GM would go back to their table and bounce things off and maybe go back behind the curtain, hoping nobody would see them. I always saw because I was watching for that. What was it? Was it 20? What year did the Ryan Reeves trade? I inadvertently broke that by just being snarky. That would have been 2018 at the draft. What I started doing just for fun, kind of as a joke, was watching which GMs were on the phone and seeing if I could match them up. Like if there's only 2 GMs on the phone, you can say, okay, these 2 teams are talking. And I just started tweeting this and hundreds of retweets and responses. And before I knew it, my little joke had turned into an actual reporting strategy. And before I knew it, I realized the Penguins in St. Louis were hanging up the phone at the same time. And, I had no idea who, but I knew that they were talking. That's why the decentralized draft is terrible. That's why this will be the first and last one the NHL ever does. Everyone realized it was a really dumb idea. It sounded good. But then the teams realized they had to fly in all of their scouts, not to Los Angeles, not to Las Vegas, New York, Montreal, or any of the other cities in which they hold the draft, but they had to actually fly all of their scouts and some families into their home city and still buy them a hotel room and dinners and all of that. And they realized they saved zero money. They get no benefit for this decentralized draft other than the fact that the GM gets to sleep in his own bed for an extra couple of nights. And they're like, well, that's not worth it. So next year, I can almost assure you they're going back to the regular draft. Let's go to JJ Hall. What destinations do I think are most likely for Erik Karlsson if a deal is to get done? Do I know what Dubas is asking for him? No. Again, believe me, if I knew what Dubas wanted for Erik Karlsson, it would be front and center on the webpage. Now, what teams make sense? I think there are a handful. I like Los Angeles. Sadly, I think Elliot Friedman banged this drum for quite a while, only to be told no. And that was Ottawa. Ottawa is looking now for an offensive right-handed defenseman. Can you imagine? I don't know. Ottawa would make so much sense, but there's so much history there. Does either side want to pop open that can of worms? I don't know. It would be entirely interesting, wouldn't it? Minnesota is a team that could use an upgrade in talent. St. Louis could as well, but I don't think St. Louis would humor Karlsson and his game. I think St. Louis and Doug Armstrong are happy being a deeper physical team rather than having some high-end talent pieces. I could be wrong. You could wake up tomorrow and say, yeah, Erik Karlsson makes sense. I don't think some of the up-and-comers like Columbus would make sense. Columbus, even Detroit. I mean, Karlsson would fit in Detroit, wouldn't he? He'd fit there like a glove, but I don't think Steve Yzerman wants an Erik Karlsson. So that's off the top of my head. Michael Thompson. Well, thank you very much, man. Michael tipped me $4.99 here. I genuinely appreciate that. Let's see here. Thank you for doing these. Crosby is the GOAT, not Mario. Sorry, bro. I can see new fans saying that. If you didn't grow up watching Mario, it's really easy. Yeah. Chicken a la King, hoping for another young guy as one of the assistants. That'd be interesting. Oh, Lane Lambert. That's who. Lambert lasted a year and a half with the Islanders. Got run out of town, basically, very quickly. And Seattle scooped him up. I thought that was, it's one thing to avoid a retread, but you'd like to see a guy stick around more than a year and a half without getting a kind of a rotten rep, right? But again, you and I are not in the interview process. And we don't necessarily have all of that. Ron Francis is lucky to still be employed. Well, they moved Francis away from, the day-to-day hockey decisions. That's for sure. Do I like honey mustard dressing? That is the real question. No, I hate it. Do I think there's a chance that Dan Hughes wasn't the Pens' first choice and someone else turned down the job and he was their second choice? Possible. Yeah. Very, very possible. Thoughts on Dallas's RFA, Maverick Bourque, the best player in the AHL years running. JR, I have written, I think 3, maybe 4 times since the beginning of April, actually, when I started looking ahead to the summer acquisitions. I even put Maverick Bourque on the Penguins trade board before the trade deadline, like back in February. Big fan of what Maverick Bourque might bring to a team. Absolutely. Home run, slam dunk, get her done. He clearly is kind of getting wedged out of Dallas. Was he not scratched for a playoff game or two as well? So let's go to Michael here before I get into the high trade costs, because no one asked me about them. I figured you guys would hit me with the trade stuff. We've already done an hour. Let's see here. The last stream, I made a comment saying the Panthers are like the 2016 Penguins team. I see him clear as day, 4 solid lines, and a Hall of Fame goalie. The Penguins would beat the Penguins would beat the Florida Panthers in 7. I don't know, Michael. That would be a war, wouldn't it? Because what Florida's big strength is they don't necessarily destroy you at the beginning of the series. Although this year they've knocked teams out of series very quickly. But like Toronto, they just kept pounding and pounding and pounding and pounding. So by the end of the series, Toronto had to give it all they had just to get to Game 7. But by Game 7, they had nothing left. There was nothing in those legs in Toronto because Florida had taken it from them. So with the 2016 Penguins, who also took a beating from the Capitals, and I think Sidney Crosby would be the big difference, right? And Matt Murray was playing like a Hall of Fame goaltender back in 16. Chicken a la King says, I hope Bros makes the jump this season. I think it's almost an assured thing this year that Chicken a la King, that Tristan Bros makes the jump. Duba said he was going to get called up late last season. But he didn't want Bros to come up in a bad situation, I guess the last few games of the year or whatever it was. The NES Addict made it. I appreciate you. One of our originals, we used to do these at noon. It goes to lunch. I know. I've seen your comments, Ness. Okay, let's get to trade talk. And once again, I apologize. I don't have anything to put on the screen. Really, laptop takes a dirt nap. I'm charging up. I'm fixing up the old laptop, which also has motherboard problems. Just get it running in the nick of time. Let's start with Marco Rossi. So I think a lot of you want to see him in a Penguins jersey. So what is he going to cost, right? What does a second-line center, 60-point guy cost. Now, here's where there's a detail that you and I don't know. All right. And that is contract. Minnesota put forth, what was it, a 5-year deal worth a bit more than $5 million per. Rossi didn't accept it. Eventually, Minnesota pulls the offer, and now they don't want to pay him that much, or they don't really want to pay. That's that's through the hockey chatter, and oftentimes this is second and third hand, and you know how the tin can game works. By the time it gets to by the time I'm hearing it, it's been warped once or twice. So take it with a grain of salt. Kind of what the chatter in external circles was that Minnesota just isn't sold on Rossi as a second line center. They want somebody bigger. They want somebody more dynamic. Bill Guerin doesn't see him as his second line center. So they didn't want to pay him $6, $7, $8 million long term. And that's kind of the root of the issue. From that standpoint, now we have to look at the other piece of the puzzle we don't know. What does Rossi want? Is he willing to accept a bridge deal? 3 years, $5 million to kind of prove himself with somebody else? Or does he want, a 7-year, $7 million contract? That's a huge deal. If Rossi wants big money long-term, I say pass, first of all. I like him. I think he'd work well with the Penguins. But I'm not going to buy the cow right now. I'm not going to get saddled with a 7-year contract for a player that you might regret in a year or two. I want to see how he's going to perform in my organization before I shell out 7 years. That's first of all. Second of all, that affects trade value quite a bit. Minnesota can ask for Rickard Rakell. They can demand Brian Rust. But if the Penguins are like, okay, on paper that makes sense, Rakell makes more sense than Brian Rust. Rakell for Rossi is pretty close to even. Depending on your point of view, I think Minnesota actually would have to kick in a little bit more. Some people might say the Penguins have to kick in a little bit more. I don't know. I think that's why it's kind of, you're in that ballpark of an even hockey swap. Then the Penguins say, well, hey, my guy's under contract for 3 more years at a guaranteed $5 million. Can you guarantee me your guy's under contract for 3 more years? And that's where things sort of break down. But Rickard Rakell, or if we know, let's say into next year that the Rangers pick is going to be later in the first round. Now that comes into play for someone like Rossi. It also comes into play for a J.J. Peterka. I think Rakell is a natural fit, and Buffalo needs veteran help. The Penguins need youth help. Ta-da! You basically swap wingers at different points in their career, and you hope that Rakell brings a better attitude. I don't think the Penguins really have any defensemen to give to Buffalo that would strengthen the top of their blue line, and certainly you're not trading J.J. Peterka for somebody who strengthens the bottom of your blue line. Buffalo surely might ask for a guy like Jackson Ivany as a throw-in, but a number 1 pick would not be out of line for Peterka, because I think his track record is solid enough that you can expect to pay him $7 million over 5 years, over 7 years. You can give that contract to him without as much worry as you could with Rossi. So that's what I'm looking at in terms of cost for the Penguins trade talk. Let's see here. The tin can rumor was 7 for 7 that for Rossi that scared the Flyers away from him, purportedly. Maybe I saw that and that's where that came from. I don't know. 7 for 7. Rossi would have to have another 60-point season before I was comfortable giving him that contract. Buffalo needs right-handed defensemen. I know. But are you really thinking that Erik Karlsson would go to Buffalo? Or Chris Letang, for that matter? They would say no. Just kind of a bad fit there. Okay, kids, that is the end of the questions. Look at that. Michael, thank you so much for kicking in a couple bucks. I appreciate the people who think I'm obtuse. I don't know. I've done so much over the last couple of years. I should be used to critics by now. But occasionally I want to go to their office. I want to go to their job and watch them do their job and say, well, why didn't you do this? Ha ha. And they'll say, well, I just did. Weren't you paying attention? I'll be like, no, it doesn't matter. Ha ha. I digress. Have fun, kids. I appreciate you all. And I suppose we'll do this again next week because we can talk more draft picks next week. And we'll start doing some draft pick videos here on the channel. Like, subscribe, and watch out for deer if you're on the motorcycle. All right. Have fun.